Okay, now we are ready to roll. So again, I do want to welcome everyone to the Safe Routes to School Coaching Action Network webinar. My name is Michelle Gully, and I will be facilitating today's webinar. This call is part of a series of webinars developed by America Walks and the National Center for Safe Routes to School. And the goal of this program is to educate individuals and organizations on topics that may boost the overall success of Safe Routes to School projects across the United States. The National Center for Safe Routes to School and this program have both been made possible by funding from the Federal Highway Administration. Excuse me. Before we get started, I do want to go over just a few administrative details. Please note that all of the attendee phone lines are muted. Due to the large number of participants that we have on these calls, this helps to cut down on the confusion and the background noise, making it more enjoyable for everyone. If you do have a question during the webinar, please use the question and answer box on your computer screen. And as facilitator, I'll read the questions as they come in and respond if I am able. If you cannot access the webinar program at all, but obviously can hear me, please send me an email at mgully@americawalks.org. That's mgulley@americawalks.org, and I'll do my best to walk you through some steps to get you online with us. Also note that the webinar is being recorded, so worst case scenario, if you can't get access to the program, you will have a chance to download it at a later time from both the America Walks website, which is www.americawalks.org, and the National Center for Safe Routes to School website, which is www.saferoutesinfo.org. Now, questions pertaining to the subject matter of the presentation may be entered at any time, but will be addressed at the end. We try to save about 10 to 15 minutes for that. We do ask that if you have questions about Safe Routes to School that don't pertain to today's topic, that you please submit those directly to the National Center for Safe Routes to School via their website. So if you were unable to get all that information down, the different website addresses that I put out, please don't worry. I'm going to post it again at the end of the webinar. I'm also going to post all of our wonderful speakers' contact information, so if you are looking for that or you want to jot that down, it will be posted at the end. So now I'd like to very briefly turn your attention to the agenda. You should be able to see up on your computer screen my agenda right now. You'll see we've already gone through the first point, which is the welcome and administrative details. And next we're going to dive right into our feature presentation, which is Get Inspired, Ideas to Refresh, Re-energize, and Reframe Safe Routes to School. We have a wonderful speaker that I'm very excited about today, Mark Fenton, who many of you know is a public health planning and transportation consultant and an adjunct associate professor at Tufts University in Boston. And with that, I am actually going to turn it right over to Mark so that we can make sure he has enough time for his wonderful presentation today. Okay, Mark, I just turned it over to you. And now you should see a little box on your screen asking you.
Yep. And I did. I said show my screen. Did it come through?
Yep, wonderful. Now we see your slideshow.
I can't believe this technology just never ceases to amaze. Thank you so much, Michelle. Thanks for all the work, the great work you guys have been doing. I've been enjoying these webinars over the years and am honored to have an opportunity to talk to this august group, because I know by definition if you're listening in today, you're somebody who's been in the trenches doing the amazing work of Safe Routes to School probably for some time, and maybe for all of the time that the program's been up and running over the last almost decade now in one form or another. I was recalling the other day when we were talking about our final organizing call that some of the earliest activity happened in the late 90s, 1997. I think some of the earliest communities took up the banner, and it is I feel so very strongly about the amazing power of Safe Routes to School and the tremendous stuff that I've seen happen across the country as a result of this. And in fact, my comments today are going to revisit some of the themes that I think some of us felt way back when we had the first national meeting, the national convening of Safe Routes to School in Michigan several years ago. And we talked about the dream that someday that the idea of Safe Routes to School as a program would disappear because we have Safe Routes to School as the new norm in our communities, that it would be normal for the environments around our schools to be so safe and inviting that anybody who lived close enough could walk or bicycle to those schools without any hesitation. That's what I'm referring to when I talk about eliminating the capital letters, that we don't have to think about a program because it is in fact reflective of how we build and design and maintain our communities. So that's kind of the theme today. There's a case to be made that with the changing in federal transportation funding and so on, and I think a very serious national conversation going on around those kinds of issues, there's a real opportunity here to think about what the next generation of safe routes ought to be. So I really have three goals in my comments. I first and foremost want to remind ourselves of the tremendous success that we have already seen and the many lessons that we've learned that I think guide how we think about it, safe routes to school going forward. Second, I do want to acknowledge that there are real challenges. One of the things we've learned is that this stuff is not easy. We had some folks submit questions beforehand, and of course, one of the constant themes is, boy, this is hard work, and how do I re-engage people? They were enthused. We had the walking school bus going for a while, but how do we keep people engaged over time? We understand there are lots of challenges because this is not trivial stuff. And then I want to talk about an opportunity. I think there is a movement afoot that may help us think about what the next generation of safe routes to school might look like as it evolves, and we take the great learnings of the last decade or so. I think, again, at the heart of it, my question is illustrated by the two photos on this slide. The one on the top, many of you can take a picture in your community of a school that's got this kind of a lineup at arrival or dismissal time. And the picture from the bottom, when we were doing a workshop in Seattle, West Seattle, this mom pulled up, and I thought, oh, my gosh, my dream would be that that's the new normal, that it's a line of bicyclists dropping off kids at the school, and that it's the rare automobile that pulls up to the school to drop off and pick up. On the one hand, you say that's sort of wacky, but if you went to a school in the Netherlands or Denmark, I suspect you'd say, well, that's not as wacky as you might think. And there are, in fact, schools in the United States that are starting to see this be more normal rather than not. I do want to open with a little exercise that some of you may have joined me in before. I frequently open conferences by asking people, and this is sort of a big perspective thing. It kind of sets the tone for the whole conversation, if you will. I ask them to think back to their earliest fond recollections of being physically active. And inevitably, if I have a room full of people and we sort of have folks throw out ideas, people talk about playing pickup games of wiffle ball and kickball in the neighborhood and kick the can and having a fort in the woods or that neighborhood lot that all the kids convened at. But so many people of our generation, when I say our generation, people of age 25 and above, recall having walked and biked to school, particularly as you get to folks that are 40 and older. They say, oh, yeah, we walked to school. Inevitably it's 2 miles uphill into the wind in both directions. People remember walking and bicycling to school as just a normal part of growing up. And indeed, I ask people all over the country, do you remember being what I call a free-range kid? And inevitably, people of a certain age say, yes, I was a free-range kid. I could disappear on a Saturday morning on my bicycle with my friends and not be expected to be home until dinner time or when the street lights came on. And, I'm not the only person talking about this. There are really smart people that are writing about it. Richard Louve's book, The Last Child in the Woods, actually coined the term nature deficit disorder for the kids that grow up today that aren't free range. And not only does he catalog physiological challenges, but, the sort of the emotional and developmental challenges of kids only being programmed with physical activity. They have to sign up for a camp or a sports team. They're only with kids of the same age and gender. They don't have those informal pickup games. The Time magazine issue here talked about that, and it also asked the question, is the reason that parents don't do that, which is inevitably when I ask them, why don't you let your kids, by the way, walk to school, bike anymore? Why don't you let your kid be free range? They say, well, it's not safe. There are scary people out there. If you know me well, there are creepy guys with big, thick mustaches, right? Guys just like mine, out there hiding behind every tree. And the problem with that is that we can't find any data that actually says it is dramatically more dangerous, that there are more of those folks out there, particularly over the time span, say the last 30 or 40 years, and I hope you've all seen this data before, where the percentage of kids walking and biking to school plummeted from 40% to much closer to 10 to 15%, while the percentage of kids being driven to school, the red bar on the graph here, rose from 15% to almost 50%. That's just an almost direct reversal in what we call the mode split, how kids get to school. And it happened over a fairly concise time period, 30 or 40 years, and it's exactly the time period where we got in the habit of throwing our kids in the backseat of the car for everything, a trip to the friend's house, to soccer practice, to school. And, of course, I would argue strongly that one of the results is this tripling of childhood obesity rates that we talk about, perfectly coinciding. We could overlay those two graphs as far as the time span. The time span in which we dramatically changed how our kids transport themselves or how we transport them, and this major health marker, which is really a marker of course, reduced physical activity as well as, of course, increased or unbalanced caloric intake. So we've got these problems. We know the scale, and we know that at least from a statistical standpoint, we can't prove that there's any greater danger to kids from the creepy guy hiding behind the tree. Now, having said that, as a parent of a 14 and 17-year-old, I am fully understanding of people's trepidation and caution, and as a result, I think one of the great successes of Safe Routes to School has been to attack that head on and to say, great, if you do have concerns about safety, then let's build that in. I mean, it's the first word in the program, safe routes to school, right? Let's make it safe enough for your child and deal with if you have a perception that there's traffic danger, that there's criminal danger, that there are stray dogs, whatever it is, it's our job as part of the program to tackle that. And indeed, I've seen amazing stuff around the country, innovative, thoughtful solutions and ideas. And one of the notable things, as a guy who travels all over the country doing workshops, I'm amazed at the number of people that can rattle off the 5 E's to me. And I'm not talking just traffic engineers, parents who have no technical background at all in planning or transportation or public safety can tell me, oh, yeah, the 5 E's, we do all of this. We're doing an education program, and we've got law enforcement helping us, and we've engineered some new sidewalks. It's really great. I think that's one of the great successes of Safe Routes to School is sort of this notion of teaching lots of people about a comprehensive approach. The pictures on the right are from our school right in my own town, where I give my wife tremendous credit for running a community-based program that's really gotten a lot of community engagement. Notably, I think there are some sectors that have really stepped up to the plate, and among them, I think the health community has been particularly strong around the country. And one of the reasons is because I think they are accustomed to convening and thinking about programmatic interventions, right? They've done that around things, whether it's seat belts or child safety restraints or vaccination programs, where they have to do outreach and education. They often had to convene interdisciplinary groups. And now they recognize physical inactivity is one of the great public health threats that we face, and so they're convening teams, community-based groups around that, interdisciplinary groups, to help meet these recommendations that you see here. And again, I hope these are familiar, and if not, you should go to the website of the Department of Health and Human Services here, because these are the recommendations that say every child should get at least an hour of moderate physical activity a day, and indeed, walking and bicycling to school counts. In other words, it doesn't have to all be structured sport activity. It doesn't have to be formal exercise. Children walking and bicycling, or as I like to say, being free-range kids, is a perfectly reasonable way to get some of that daily physical activity. Keep in mind, by the way, that's a minimum recommendation. We know kids benefit from more physical activity. We just say, as a minimum, an average of about an hour a day is a minimum target. The other thing I've learned from the health folks is that they like to do evaluation. They're big on that. And they have very often been good partners. I've seen communities around the country do great stuff with collecting, which I think should be, by the way, the first E, the evaluation data on how kids are getting to school now, what travel modes, why are they selecting those modes, where are they coming from. That baseline information really helps you set up what you're going to do in an intervention. So I hope all of you listening have done one form or another of this sort of data collection. If you haven't, then you should, because if you're struggling with your program, or if you're asking, well, where next, baseline evaluation, where you figure out, again, where kids are coming from, by what travel mode, and why, can be strikingly informative. And I've seen communities, even, the health department work with the planning department, with students in the schools to do things like map where kids live and color code that by their travel mode. So they code the map so that they can say, well, there's a lot of green, a lot of walking and bicycling from this neighborhood, but look at all the red, all the driving from over here. Wonder why that is. And then actually address that, speak to the parents, speak to the kids, and figure out why. Our health partners seem to be really good at that stuff, and this, in fact, is an example of a mode split graphic. So they just did show of hands survey in the classrooms in West Bend, Wisconsin. It was a health coalition there that collected this data. The reason this is striking is because I showed them the national data, and they said, I don't think it's that bad here. Then they went out and collected it, and they realized, nearly 50% of our kids are coming by car. Who knew? We saw the lineup out there, but we never actually collected the numbers. So I'm recommending that as an exercise if you haven't done it yet, and I'm pleased to see the number of communities that in fact had. We know that parents are stepping up to the plate across the country. This is just from one of the communities where I've been lucky enough to take part, Washington Elementary in San Jose, and they've sort of embraced it. The parents said it's a largely Hispanic community surrounding the school there, that district. So their program is called La Camina Contigo, and it's really a very family-oriented, neighborhood-oriented walking group. When we went out to do a walk audit, the parent leaders in the picture in the lower left there were the first ones to come out, and they were the ones to point out, out to me where they still got traffic problems. They said, yeah, a lot of cars still do that illegal U-turn, the picture in the top left there, and we're working on that. I have been impressed again and again by the parents who have stepped up to the plate, even very busy parents, sort of you would never think would have the time for this. So that's the good news. They're great examples. We've seen law enforcement be really great partners, and in fact, I sometimes almost feel like I hear a sigh of relief from them when the idea of a Safe Routes program is brought to them, because they're dealing with this all the time. The number of cops who have said to me, I'll tell you, there's nothing I like dealing with less than an entitled parent who's trying to rush to pick a child up after school and get them to band practice or to soccer or something. So they'll do crazy things like the pickup truck here, where the guy came across 2 lanes of traffic facing the opposite direction, pulled up, got the kid, and then pulled out against the traffic. And the law enforcement say, so the notion of getting organized around the pick-up and drop-off process, which we often do as part of our Safe Routes to School efforts, is a great relief to them. And we all recognize there are not enough police officers to have one at every school every day with a radar gun or to enforce, so that we really have to come up with systematic or systemic solutions. And a good example of that is where the planning and the engineering field have really, I think, seen great confluence with Safe Routes to School. And this is very important at a time where the funding may be changing, where we may not have as much, say, infrastructure dollars available for a community intervention. I think the notion of coupling with the people who are working on complete streets at the national level and right at your community level is a critical opportunity. Now, let me be clear. If you've not heard Complete Streets before, you should go to the website, learn a little more. But at its heart, it's a very simple premise. It says this. It says, a road is not complete unless we have taken into account all 4 user groups, the pedestrian, the bicyclist, transit, as well as motor vehicles, in the design and maintenance of that roadway. And it's only when we think about all 4 that a street is complete. It doesn't, by the way, say that you have to paint a bike lane on every street. It just simply says we always should consider what the nearby land uses are, where the destinations are, what the logical traffic patterns are, and design appropriately for all 4, not just for the car first. Now, the reason this is important is because even if you don't have money tomorrow to build the missing sidewalk, if you can get your community to take up Complete Streets as its new, essentially, model, its policy, in fact, build it into ordinance, then that means anytime we do touch the roadways near our schools, we can't help but address the issues of insufficient sidewalks, missing bicycle lanes, unsafe crossings. Those all have to be addressed to make a street more complete. So, again, the short answer here for the person who says, well, how the heck do I move forward if we don't have money to build sidewalks tomorrow? I'd say then put your energy into getting a Complete Streets ordinance addressed by your community and accepted as law, basically, so that every time you do touch a road, you're making it more complete, because you're out there doing a certain amount of paving and repair work and digging up roads for sewers, and even under those opportunistic windows, we can then make improvements. So if they don't have the money for the picture in the lower right there to fix that sidewalk tomorrow, I wish that they would in Albuquerque, but if they can't, then when they're going to dig up that road or repave it, that's the moment to make sure that we put the sidewalk in that's missing. And the important point around this is that our engineering colleagues are doing this. In other words, they're accepting the idea. Here's a road in Champaign-Urbana, Illinois, that was redeveloped, turned from a 4-lane road when during a paving project to a 3-lane here. You may have heard the term road diet. Sometimes it's called a diet because you're getting from 4 lanes to 3, so the road in theory is getting skinnier. But in fact, what you see is it's just being reallocated because you now have one travel lane each direction, a center turning lane, and bike lanes. And because you only have a center turning lane now, you can put in islands like the one at the top of the right-hand picture that makes for a nice pedestrian refuge as they cross. So what you've done here is reduced collisions as you go from the picture on the left to the right, because there's a common collision in which the car in the left lane stops and the one behind them either rear ends them or tries to dodge into the right lane. That goes away in the right-hand arrangement, as well as improving conditions for bicyclists and pedestrians. Why do I show this? Well, A, that's making the street more complete, and it's an example of an opportunistic improvement. And B, the woman who did it, Jennifer Selby, who's a wonderful friend and was the traffic engineer that did this project in Urbana, was also intimately involved in their Safe Routes to School program. Her own children walked to school as part of a little neighborhood walking school bus. And I believe that to some degree her sensibility about bicycle and pedestrian accommodation seeped between her work in engineering and her work as a neighborhood activist, if you will, around Safe Routes to School. And she's just one example of the many people around the country doing fantastic work, and even bringing it, in her case, to their professional work. In other words, it's not just her volunteer work with the community, but she, as a professional on the engineering staff, brought that sensibility to her work. So that's kind of the good news in my mind. The good news is massive momentum, lots of people stepping up to the plate, really innovative ideas. I didn't even scratch the surface of the kind of creative, clever stuff that we see going on around the country as people do encouragement programs and education and outreach. Having said that, I really think it behooves us to cut to the chase and say, well, where are we and where do we have to go next? And I think we got to acknowledge there's some real challenges that still, for the most part, although we can tell lots of great stories, our transportation systems are still very heavily car and, in many school systems, bus-oriented around the country. And that much of the effort we've made so far has been heavily programmatic. So it's the walking school buses, the encouragement programs, the walk-to-school days, which often suffer with struggles with sustainability. Because now that people are getting into their second and third generation of volunteers, our household is a good example. My kids have graduated out of the elementary school, so my wife and I are now putting more of our volunteer time into the middle and the high school, meaning that elementary school, we've got to find the next generation of parents to lead the walking school buses, to organize the walk-to-school day events. And that's hard, and it becomes literally fatiguing. I know some of you sort of probably have been doing that great work and know how hard it is. The other thing is on a larger scale, we're still making bad decisions from a land use standpoint. I'm amazed at the number of communities I can visit where they're still putting the school out on the edge of town. When they have to build the second generation, third generation school, they're building it out on the cheap land to save the money on their taxes. And of course, there's that parental fear that undergirds so much of parents' decision making. But just as striking to me is the administrations that we approach when we come to principals, when we come to superintendents, and their fear of liability or simply the reality that they are down in the trenches worrying about their school performance on standardized tests. They're trying to balance their budgets. They've got all that other work. And if you come in and say, oh, by the way, could you launch a Safe Routes to School program, they're going to say, there's no time. We cannot add more. So let me give some kind of anecdotal examples of this just to kind of flavor sort of where I think we are in this. I was just working in Torrington, Connecticut, a beautiful community in western Connecticut, where at some point some years ago they decided that the thing they could do to make their kids safest was to bus every child. Even those that are within literally hundreds of yards of the school are provided a bus ride. And parents have become accustomed to what we call courtesy busing because many of those kids are coming very short distances. And it's not because there's a hazard there. It's just they've gotten used to it. At the school we visited, one of the schools where we visited, that we saw an elaborate system where literally kids are escorted to every bus, where there's an elaborate sign out for the handful that walk or bike, but many more that get picked up by car. And yet, throughout the conversation, as we observed all this, the principal admitted, she says, it does seem crazy they were paying something like $30,000 to $50,000 for a bus that's going to do essentially a quarter-mile loop around the school here, particularly where we know there are sidewalks that the kids could walk to some of those schools. So although we've institutionalized some of this dependence on the motor vehicle, I think we also are seeing the cost of it. Another example of that cost would be the school in North Carolina where we did a workshop years ago, and they told us with some pride about the federal transportation grant, not Safe Routes to School money, but a transportation enhancements grant they had gotten on the order of $250,000 to build this looping entry road on the top right picture there. And the reason they had to build that was to be able to store all the vehicles at dismissal time. You're seeing a picture from arrival time here. The kids are coming into school. But at dismissal time, that road is full of cars, and now because it's a long serpentine road, those cars don't back up onto the main street, which was the reason they built that. So they built a giant parking lot, linear parking lot, basically, for the cars to line up at pickup time. And this, by the way, at the same time as you see in the pictures on the left, those blue signs, they were making the case that parents, please be sure to vote in the referendum to save our teachers' assistants and other resource teachers. So they were going to have massive budget cuts, lose teacher positions, while we are spending $250,000 on building a road so that cars can line up. And I understand that those are two different piles of money, but I think it's really important that we recognize that we've got to think about where we spend our increasingly, if you will, compact resources, restricted resources, and what we're going to do about that. We've really got to come to grips with this. So these are examples of, I think, the challenges, some of the challenges we face even with the physical infrastructure. Another would be in Dover, Ohio, where the high school, beautiful downtown, multi-story high school, but it wasn't big enough. They had to build a new one. So where do they go? They go where the land is cheapest, out on the edge of town. And so you end up with this gorgeous school out there on a road, pictured on the far right here, that I would submit to you no rational parent would allow their kid to walk or bike along because there's no accommodation whatsoever. And when we did the analysis, we probably accounted for the great low cost of that land out there, but nobody counted for the long-term transportation costs of shipping every kid out to that school by bus, and even worse, potential health costs of some number of increased cases of, for example, adolescent type 2 diabetes because those kids are being less physically active. My point is this. We got to think about all of those. And if you were making the case to me, say, Mark, I'm going to go make the case to administration, what should I be talking about? I'd say, make sure we do a full analysis of the costs, including transportation costs, when we go to build a new school. Certainly, these are pictures, again, from my town. So we have these great walk-to-school day events, but the amount of work in putting on one-day events and then recruiting people to do the ongoing promotion, the walking, the bicycling, is walking groups, bike trains, walking school buses, is probably known to all of you that do this work at the local level. And here's one of the real problems. As a public health guy and as a scientist, as a researcher, I can't help but remind myself of what the data tells me about behavior change programs. Some of you probably have seen me present this data. This is a walking encouragement program that was published in the Journal of the American Medical Association. There are other studies like this where basically in this case they were just encouraging people to walk. They were doing the education, teaching them how to warm up and stretch. This was an adult program, but here's the important point. Over the 6 months in which they did the heavy encouragement, like we do in a Safe Routes to School program, they increased the amount those people were walking. You see all three of the lines go up. But that's not the interesting question. The interesting question to my mind is what happens after we stop calling you up, after we stop giving you T-shirts and water bottles and prizes and leave you to your own devices. And here's the interesting thing. Despite the fact that at 6 months people in this program saw reduced weight and increased aerobic fitness, so let me say it again, they were getting more fit and they were losing weight just from simply walking 40 minutes a day. Once left to their own devices, you see that the exercise minutes per week tended to drop off. I call this the stickiness problem, and it's just an example of the kind of research we see around the behavior change stuff when it is dependent only on education and encouragement. When all we do is educate and encourage, there's a reasonably good chance that you're going to see this decay in the behavior. By the way, law enforcement, every time I show this, if I show this graphic in a Safe Routes workshop, the police officer will say, turn that thing upside down, and it's a replica of what we see when we do speed enforcement. If all we do is put an officer out there with a radar gun, we'll see the speeds go down as long as the drivers know he's there and he's writing tickets. The day he leaves, and then everybody's happy, right? The neighborhood's happy. Oh, the speeds are slower in our neighborhood or by our school. Then the officer goes away because he's got to go to the next task. And what happens? The speeds creep right back up. If all we do is the education and the encouragement and the enforcement, in other words, those 3 E's, though critically important, there's a reason we talk about all 5, because they're not enough alone. That's why we need to do the other stuff. We have to actually do the engineering and the infrastructure changes to support it. And the good news is, I think that's where the real opportunity lies. So moving to sort of my third point. Great success so far. There are challenges in sustainability and getting that deeper kind of, if you will, infrastructure and policy level change. But that what I'm calling the healthy communities movement, which is really gaining momentum nationally and is getting some real national support, even from the big guys like the Centers for Disease Control, I think is an opportunity to move forward on this. And I just want to remind you that if you've never heard the term before, the folks that are working in community-based health promotion are using a phrase called they call the acronym PS&E, or Policy, Systems, and Environmental Change. Maybe you're intimately familiar with that, but if you haven't heard it before, it essentially says this. It recognizes what I just described as the stickiness problem, that simply telling people to exercise more and to eat a better diet is not sufficient. That's not enough to get population-level behavior change. And so if we think about a school district, it's not enough to get all the kids that could possibly walk and bike to do so. That we really need to operate on a policy, systems, and environmental level to get that to happen. And these, by the way, is just a list of some of the national initiatives. Maybe you've been involved with some of those, and I will point this out. I just give a snapshot of what some of, I just mentioned state health departments or the insurance industry or local hospitals. We're seeing community hospitals start to step up, or community foundations. So there are a range of potential partners, and if you're not aware of anything happening in your community, then reach out to them and go to the local community foundation, go to the local hospital and say, what are we doing? Are we doing any work about community-level health promotion, about environmental and policy-level change? Now, I'm back to my observation that one of the reasons I like to get the health folks involved is because they like surveillance. And I don't mean like security cameras. I mean like collecting data on chronic disease risks and things like that. Indeed, I guarantee you that some of your communities or states, they're talking about, or maybe already doing this, collecting BMI or body mass index data on the students, that's height and weight, and then reporting on that and talking about what the profiles are for the community. And you may be aware that in some communities that's been somewhat contentious, that people are a little uptight about that because they feel like it's an invasion of privacy, or you're telling me that I'm not being a good parent, that I'm not feeding my kid, getting enough activity, that's a private decision. So setting that aside, I'm not trying to enter that debate. My point is, if I were going to think about the thing that I would love to have every health department around the country have to do as part of their community health surveillance, it would be to measure and report in a structured and routine way the travel mode split at every school in their community, at least their elementary schools, but preferably their middle and high as well. I would love them to have to collect and report that data. And by the way, this is not a hard thing to collect. This can be done, at a morning attendance, a few days each fall and spring, just enough enough days to kind of collect meaningful data. And remember that graphic I showed earlier of Decorah Elementary in West Bend? It is surprisingly eye-opening, even to the people that are standing out there every day directing the traffic. They are always stunned when they see numbers like 40 and 50% of the kids are coming by car. How cool would it be if we could get our health departments to do that? And here's one of the reasons why. Because I think one of the other big challenges we face is that we've still been moving along this work in many, many cases at what I'd call the mid-level. We're reaching out to our partners in the planning department and maybe public works, the local engineers helped us get the sidewalk built or submit the Safe Routes grant to get some infrastructure, some crosswalks repaired. But I think there is a huge opportunity here to push up to the very top level. That is, to get superintendents and principals, so the top level in the schools, and people that are doing transportation coordination. Very often when I go to a community, the school folks that are involved are health, PE, the wellness coordinator. That's great, but it's not enough. If you're not talking to the top administrators, in my experience, you're not really making policy-level changes. You're not able to change that policy like in Torrington, Connecticut, where it's school policy to bus every kid, even those within a quarter mile of the school. We need parents involved, and that means reaching out through the parent-teacher organizations. And quite frankly, if we're going to be successful, we need the elected officials. We need city council, school board members, which are normally elected boards, planning commissioners, the ones that make the routine decisions, like the ones that influence where that school was built in Dover, Ohio, that I showed the slides of a few moments ago. When we did the workshops in Columbia, Missouri a couple of years ago, that's the picture on the right there, that's the mayor sitting with a couple of school board members, a member of the planning department, and a couple of parents. In other words, they got the real players in the room, and as a result, they were able to make policy-level decisions like creating a remote pick-up and drop-off area that was on the other side of a park adjacent to the school that we were workshopping. It's called West Boulevard Elementary, and some of you may have seen me give a case study on this. In deciding to create that pick-up and drop-off area on the far side of the park and then get Safe Routes to School money to build the pick-up and drop-off and the trail through the park to connect it, what they did was give the opportunity for even those kids who were coming by car and by bus to be dropped off on the far side of the park. And now, all of a sudden, it's not just the kids that live within walking distance of the school, but those who ride by car or by bus could be dropped off over there and at least get that 12, 14-minute walk through the park every morning and afternoon at pick-up and drop-off time. There's no way, trust me on this, I'm quite certain, that happened without the top-level folks in the game, without people like school board members and parents and PTA presidents and the superintendent, or in this case, the principal at the time, in the conversation saying, yeah, we're willing to try this. So now I'm back to my notion of if I could have the public health officials collecting that mode share data, that's an opportunity to then present to these kind of top-level folks and start to talk to them about eliciting change. Now, I will say this. you may find that this is a hard conversation to have yourself. And I've got to give a quick plug to the National Center for Safe Routes to School and America Walks. National Center has done a phenomenal job of training workshop facilitators all over the country in a really comprehensive approach. And the reason I mention this is some communities, it's really hard to have these conversations internally, but if you can bring in an outside facilitator to lead a workshop that includes often a walk audit, like the picture on the right-hand side here. I'm back to my Connecticut trip of only a week ago, where we had a lot of public officials, and we actually walked one of the routes to one of the schools, and I had them create a human curb extension. And I got to tell you, there's nothing better for getting a mayor or a school principal to think about how precarious the walk to school is than to have them standing there and have a car zip by at about 45 miles an hour and think, wow, would I let a 12-year-old do this? And I make them do that during the walk audits. I don't let them off the hook. And we thought about the notion if we could extend the curb there and create a safety refuge and narrow the crossing distance, that could make a real difference. Getting them that experience, and it's easier sometimes for an outside facilitator, somebody who's trained in this stuff, to do this. Because we're not from there. We don't have any preordained biases about what the right answer is. We just talk about what we've learned from around the country, what our best practices. Another point I make on this graphic is that if you're going to reach out to the top folks, you really got to talk about what are their top priorities. So, if I were to ask you now, I won't make you do this, just mentally think about a principal. And what are the top things they're thinking about on a day-to-day basis? What's percolating along? Is it sort of launching a Safe Routes program? Probably not. It's probably things like how we're doing on our standardized tests. How do I get through yet another challenging budget cycle? Are my kids safe? Is my school secure? How do I maintain order? How do I kind of keep these kids calm during the day when I'm trying to move them through so much academic activity? And where am I on the staff morale, set or scale? Are they into this? Is their energy waning? And I can't help but put that list on the left side here, in the left column, the list of principals' concerns, and say, it looks to me like, man, Safe Routes to School can positively impact each of those. And indeed, when I walk into an administrator now, I do not say, I would like your help in launching a Safe Routes to School program. I say, hey, how's your transportation budget? Are you driving? Are you spending a lot of your buses moving kids from very short distances to the school because of hazard busing or courtesy busing? Hey, how's your academic performance? Would we like to have these kids more ready to learn when they come in the morning because they've been physically active, and reduce, sort of trips down to the principal's office for behavior because they've burned off energy during their daily trip to school? Hey, is the staff psyched to have to go outside every day and act as traffic cops and deal with totally wigged-out parents during the pick-up and drop-off procedure that is, somewhat chaotic and frantic? Would the staff love to have that off of their plate because you've cut in half the number of cars in front of the school every day? Now, I don't mean to be grandiose here. Obviously, I can't necessarily guarantee we're going to do all those things. But I'm going to suggest, and I sincerely believe this, that if we're going to reach out to administrators, we should be talking about what they care about and then exploring with them how Safe Routes to School is at least part of the remedy to some of the challenges they face on a regular basis. And if we don't posit it that way, I don't understand why they'd be interested in working with us. If they're not interested, then we don't end up with systemic solutions, where we've done things like West Boulevard Elementary, actually moving the pickup and drop-off location so that every kid gets a walk. That's the kind of stuff that I think really raises the bar. So maybe this is, I hope, in fact, that this is sort of second nature and you've all done this. But my observation around the country is administrators are sometimes a tough nut to crack, that the top folks, as well as at the community level, city councilors and so on, they think this is a nice little program for those of you that are ready to organize walking school buses and encourage the kids to walk and bike. And we've got to get beyond that. It is time to say, no, this is so much more. And to that end, one of the complaints that people throw out, or the cautions, they'll say, this all sounds great, but what about liability? And I'm going to remind you, there are a lot of great webinars archived, as Michelle alluded to a moment ago, one of which was specifically on liability issues. Sort of, do schools incur great liability by condoning, for example, a walk-to-school program, a walking school bus? And I'd send you to that webinar. I would not do justice to an hour-long webinar other than to say, I took some great stuff away from that I use in my conversations with school administrators, not the least of which is, you go out in front of lots of schools at pickup and drop-off time and take some digital photos, like the one of that red pickup truck going the wrong way and kids running out between vehicles and so on, and say, you've already got a major liability concern out there. Trust me, you are probably sitting on a potential time bomb, even if it's just fender benders, let alone, goodness sakes, something worse. If you do Safe Routes to School comprehensively and with best practices, you're very, very probably lowering your liability risk because you're getting kids into a safer travel mode to and from school and using the very best practices. So obviously if you avoid negligence and do things like that, you really also benefit from some of the immunity that government organizations have. So my real point is, if this is one of your issues, go online, get on that webinar, listen to it closely, get some of the resources there, like the one I show here in the image, and prepare yourself to have the conversation about liability risks and so on. Quick side note, increasingly, as I do school-based workshops, I am finding the other thing that administrators are thinking about is faculty and staff wellness. They're caring about the healthcare costs, and they're beginning to say, could I get my faculty a little more physically active? Maybe they'll act up less in the classroom if I can have them being more physically active. So we've added walk audits, walkabouts at all the workshops that I do with faculty and staff. But to be on a serious note, recognize that indeed there's evidence that physically active employees are absent less, more productive, all of the things in the lower left here. And as you create an environment near the school that is safer for walking and bicycling, we create a setting where maybe some faculty and staff can do that some of the time and or go out for walks at lunchtime, all of the, if you will, wellness benefits that are available. But the other opportunity I want to point out here is that as we have engaged with our colleagues in engineering and so on around the infrastructure side of the conversation, we are starting to see more and more, if you will, creative solutions that are not always the million-dollar solutions. So in doing the workshop here in Collinsville, Oklahoma, Harold Elementary, we got this traffic here. This is the pickup and drop-off, or in this case, the pickup traffic. And you'll notice in the lower picture, the principal's there visiting with us, pointing out her frustration. One of which is that there is a housing subdivision off the right-hand side of the photo. The school is to the left. You see the crosswalk in the top left picture. No kids, almost no kids walking to or from the subdivision, in large part because that crosswalk is so dangerous, and it is so dangerous because of the traffic induced by the school. So we've got parents saying, I'm not going to drive my kid. Look at the traffic in front of the school there. They're going to take their lives into their hands. So what do? Well, you're within the 1-mile no busing zone, so you're going to drive your kid to school, thereby adding to that very traffic. So we talked about, and here's the point of this, the kind of creative solutions that an engineer or a planner might offer might be, maybe we just take that intersection and really redesign the crossing, maybe put in an island or some paint or something like this, maybe a sign, in other words, reconfigure. And if that means, by the way, for the pickup and drop-off procedure, the vehicles are slowed down, then maybe that's a good thing. It creates a disincentive to drive while making it much, much safer, which should be our absolute priority, safety of the pedestrian. Much safer for the pedestrians to cross here. And as you increase the number of kids walking now, the number of vehicles drops, and you begin to alleviate the problem. I'm not trying to be Pollyanna. I'm really trying to point out the fact that this is a fairly cheap, inexpensive, and systematic approach. And the important point here is this outlasts my walking school bus. What I would love to do is get this on the ground, launch a walking school bus in the neighborhood on the right, get those kids walking regularly, get the parents at ease. Maybe we decide that we need a crossing guard at this intersection as a more sustaining sort of part of the solution. And now we've got a solution that lasts well beyond, because it's systematic and it's infrastructure-based, that lasts well beyond a short-term program. It's much stickier. Another example, in Pryor, Oklahoma, the high school is on the right-hand side of the road here, and the community center on the left. So there's a lot of high school student traffic at the end of the day, back and forth between these two facilities. The road had just been repaved. So their Safe Routes initiative stepped up and said, literally, we were there the day that they had put the pavement down but hadn't painted yet. And this would have been their standard painting, making a nice 4-lane road. It's a state route to move as much traffic as possible, right? And we said, would you consider giving that road a diet before we even do it the wrong way? Center turn lane, 1 lane in each direction, bike lanes on either side, and now that median can actually become a crossing island in the section where there's no turning available. So in other words, where cars don't need that to be a turning lane, we can make that a crossing island for the students. Sadly, I have to report that we got in too late. The engineers said the designs were already done, and they did it the other way. However, we have, at least I can say on the positive side, activated their Safe Routes to School group. They are now working very closely with engineering, and I guarantee you, man, when this road gets redone next time, it'll be the other way. Unfortunately, they'll have to live with it the wrong way, I would submit, for some number of years. Regarding the school siting decision, I told you my unhappy example, but let me tell you a happy example where in Waterbury, Connecticut, they've decided as a matter of policy, and again, let me say this word, as a matter of policy, this is their new normal. This is the way they're going to do it now. So it's going to outlast this generation of Safe Route parents and advocates and everything else, because this is their new normal. They're going back to K through 8 neighborhood schools district-wide. Any new construction will be built at the neighborhood level, but they're mostly focusing on rehabilitating and expanding their existing schools, and they feel, A, it's going to lower transportation costs, because now we're back to an environment where a lot of our kids are within walk and bike distance of their school all the way up through 8th grade. They're actually excited about the behavior opportunities of keeping the 8th graders out of the high school environment for as long as possible, or the middle school environment. But they also think those more active kids will act better, behave better. And they feel neighborhood schools will allow for more parental involvement. They'll have longer continuity with the school, so the parents have times to build a relationship with the school, which is, I think, just a wonderful idea. So here they are, and their Safe Routes to School initiative has jumped on this and said, great, as we're doing this, in fact, it's their local health initiative, it's a Pioneering Healthier Community initiative, said, great, as we go to these K-8 schools, it's the perfect setting for us to use the other E's, education, encouragement, walking school buses, bicycle trains, to now encourage people to actually take advantage of the proximity of their neighborhood schools. Indeed, the EPA has published school siting guidelines. These are just sort of model guidelines. What they really do is the way the document works, it sort of outlines a process that your community could go through. So if you're about to make a build versus rehabilitate decision, so do we rebuild the old school or build a new one, purchase land on the edge, it helps you go through the factors, environmental health, physical health and well-being, transportation costs, so that it is a much more informed decision, not just based on the cheap land, but rather on the set of criteria. And again, I'm arguing that in the 21st century, this is what Safe Routes to School needs to become as we think about policy change. We need to think entirely differently about even where we build our schools. I'm back to that Decorah Elementary in West Bend, Wisconsin. Remember the one where we had the data and they found out, oh my gosh, 50% of our kids are coming by car. Well, great workshop where we engaged parents and those top officials. The principal was intimately involved, local planners, public works staff. By the way, that school has a beautiful trail not far away, but only a fraction of the kids who might possibly use it actually walk and bike on it. And one of their policy recommendations, out of all the other stuff we talked about, safety and how to modify the pickup and drop-off procedure and setting up, yes, walking school buses and bicycle trains, groups walking together. But they felt that one of the important procedures they wanted to put in place, and have in fact done so, is a 5-minute safety delay on the automobiles at release time. So what it essentially says is the cars don't start moving until all the pedestrians and bicyclists are clear of the grounds, and the school buses. So we know that we won't have any conflict. So we won't have at the intersection in the top right picture there pedestrians trying to leave the school grounds while the cars are trying to pull in and out. So the cars are frozen, the pedestrians are released, then we move the cars. Now you can imagine what incentive that creates for the students. The kids say, Mom, don't pick me up at the school. We have to sit in the gym for like an hour and a half while all the other kids leave, and then we can go, and please let me walk on the trail, or pick me up over at the church, at the remote drop-off area that they've set up. But don't, now, it's a 5-minute delay, but to a child at the end of the school day, that might as well be infinity, is my experience. And my real point in here is that this is a systematic change that will outlast, the program, if you will. They've said this is our new policy. Now, people are going to have to be ever vigilant. I'm not saying we give up. Oh, good, we're done. I want Safe Routes to School to persist here because I don't want that policy to go away. But it's the systematic change that means when this principal leaves and the next one comes, this is the way we do it now. We always hold the cars for 5 minutes until all our bicyclists and pedestrians leave. One last point about sort of the future of Safe Routes to School. I'm excited to see the other conversations that it's opening the door to in communities. So it is not uncommon for us to get into the discussion at the school and have them start to say, well, we wanted to build a walking track so that, for example, the kids who come by bus, who come by car, could walk
while they're waiting for us to serve the breakfast, if it's a school that serves breakfast. So everybody gets to walk, even those who come by bike or car. In fact, in Dyersburg, Tennessee, they have a beautiful walking path, and you can access it. Now, here's the really neat thing. You can also walk on that path when school is out of session, in the evenings and the weekends. It's part of a trail system in the community. But that's not the case everywhere. The number of schools where I see the locked gate, beautiful playground, ball courts, things like that, or maybe even a community garden. So we often get into a discussion of what we call shared use agreements or shared use policies, which would encourage the school to partner with other institutions in the community to make sure we're utilizing those facilities, especially the ones for physical activity. So gyms and weight rooms, sports fields, playgrounds, utilize them all the time, in evenings, weekends, off hours. Now, people will immediately, you can tell me the list of why we can't do it. Liability, we got to have a janitor on service, utilities. Those are all things that can be addressed and are being successfully addressed, but you've got to consciously decide you're going to do it. I mean, in the end, this is much more of a philosophical decision. Do we want all these facilities sitting idle or not? And as you start to think about the school as a center of community health that, for starters, is safe to walk and bike to, because we've got a great Safe Routes to School program, but also has all these great facilities, it's a natural segue from the first conversation to the second. And another one that's a natural segue is to start talking about nutrition as well. If you're in the school environment talking about the health and safety of our kids, how can you not talk about what's being served in the lunch line? Or here's an interesting policy that a couple of schools that we've done workshops in have actually taken up as one of their sort of low-hanging fruit, one of the easy things they can do. It's called recess before lunch. So you have the kids take recess and then get lunch versus and so now they've burned up all their energy. They went out, they run around, they come back inside, and now they're ready to eat a better meal. There's actually less food waste in circumstances like this. We tend to see them eat a better meal, and the behavior in the lunchroom is much better. But it could be everything. It could be, are we going to really sell Paula Deen cookie dough for our fundraising, the picture on the lower left, or maybe could we be selling citrus? Or how about services like raking leaves or shoveling snow? In other words, there's just a rethinking of all of this as we start to think about a healthier school environment. So I'll take a breath, my third one of the entire talk, and just kind of summarize to say I think there is a lot of opportunity here. I'm amazed at the great work that's been done. We've also learned about the challenges, and I'll part by reminding you, if you haven't done it yet, connect with your health folks, and the health folks might not be just the usual suspects. It might not just be the health department. It might be a local community foundation, a hospital. There might be some other sort of initiative, and really start to think about systematic solutions, not the least of which start by collecting your mode share data, at least twice a year, a couple of seasons, fall and spring. And then second, let's get to the top administrators. Let's go right to the superintendents and the principals, get them involved and say, this is about helping to solve the things you face every day. How can we make Safe Routes to School work for you? And that means it's got to be policy and procedural change, not just programmatic efforts. So the programmatic efforts are great and we need them. They've opened the door to the conversation, but they're not enough. Let's go to the next level. Let's talk about school siting policies. Let's talk about complete streets as a community-wide policy. Let's look at our school travel procedures. Are we ready for a safety delay, a 5-minute delay on the motor vehicle traffic while our pedestrians and bicyclists leave? And last but not least, let's get to every school in our community, at least every elementary and eventually middle and high. We've got to scale up. It can't just be the early adopters, the schools that are ready to be in the conversation. And the reason I'm so sincerely convinced that this is going to continue to grow and we're going to have success is because the kids know the way. And these are kids we walked home with in Decorah, back to that West Bend, Wisconsin workshop. And these kids, there's a worn path through the woods. There's a bike trail that goes through the woods, but then they cut off and have worn their own path that connects into the subdivision you see in the right-hand picture. And you see the kids walking through the weeds there on their way. They've worn a trail there. They know they want to be free-range kids. It's inherent in their systems. So they're going to lead us to the right answers if we just let them. Thank you so very much. It's really been a pleasure to talk to you and to share some of my meager thoughts on this, and I hope, if nothing else, you're re-inspired to go back and keep doing the great work you're doing and to take it up to the next level. And, Michelle, thank you so much for your help in organizing this.
Oh, well, thank you, Mark. That was really wonderful. It's very inspiring to listen to you speak. So do you have a few extra minutes? Maybe we could stay on for an extra 5 minutes or so?
Questions.
Okay, great. So we'll just dive right into some questions. We'll start with the first one here, and some of these are just kind of looking for tips or opinions that you have. And this person would like to know, what is better, crossing guards at crosswalks or parents escorting kids in walking school buses?
Well, that's a great question, and indeed, there's certainly no right answer, of course, right, because different circumstances will do well in different settings. But I would say this, that you always want to think about what the systematic solution looks like. What's the thing that will be sustained in here 5 years from now? So if we can get the school and or the police department engaged with putting a crossing guard at an intersection that requires it, that's now an institutional solution. And that might be better than simply having to constantly kind of recruit walking school bus leaders. That was one of the problems we saw in our neighborhood. The other thing is I think of this walking school bus as a real transitional tool, as a way to get parents comfortable with the idea of groups of kids walking and bicycling together, get them at ease with the route they're going to take and where they're going to cross and things like that. But in the long run, we considered it a success when our walking school bus sort of disintegrated in our neighborhood because the parents got so comfortable that the older kids could look out for the younger kids that they just let the kids walk together. So in the end, however, the crossing guard becomes a critical sort of permanent fixture at an intersection that needs it. So that's a simple answer.
Sure, and I think that's great. Okay, here's one, and actually a few folks always ask questions about rural communities, and just if you have any ideas or tips you can share with folks for those rural communities where currently everyone is bused.
Sure. The observation is two things. As I've seen communities around the country, I'm amazed at some of the interesting things that are being done with trails. That the one thing rural environments have is sometimes that the land is a little easier to access. Not always. If it's farmed, it may not be. But, for example, power line corridors or rail corridors, rail-to-trail conversions. And sometimes the distances aren't as great as we think. So to connect, for example, a downtown to a school that's on the edge of town, is a trail could make a big difference in Boone, North Carolina, which is, admittedly a city in its own right, but sort of, they've connected the school to recreational areas with a multi-use trail along what I think was actually a utility, a sewer corridor. So there's that. Furthermore, I think in rural environments we've got to think about how do we have kids who are even coming on the bus get that physical activity, and ideas like the one I mentioned from Columbia, Missouri, where they've got a remote drop-off area. Now, that remote is just the other side of a park that adjoins the school grounds. So the kids don't even have to cross the street. They step off of the bus. They walk on a new trail through the park where, by the way, they've also planted some community gardens and trees, and then they end up at the school. Now the bus riders are getting that 10 or 12-minute walk through the park every day, and the teachers have said they come in, they eat a better breakfast, they're less wired up, they're much better behaved in their first classes. Other schools, the one I mentioned, Dyersburg, Tennessee, have built walking trails or pathways and have institutionalized 5, 10, 15 minutes of walking at the beginning of the day as the kids are coming in. Say, as you hop off the bus, take a couple of laps, then come on in. Same idea. Now, that's not a route to and from school, admittedly, but it does gain some of those same benefits.
Sure, that's great. Okay, here's another question that just came in. Some students take the easiest route to schools despite crossing guards located about 300 feet away. Should we propose mid-block crosswalks on a busy street that most likely wouldn't have a crossing guard nor a raised crosswalk?
So my good friend Charlie Zagier, who's done a lot of research on crosswalks and crossings, would give a more detailed question, and indeed regarding the specifics of your environment, you got to talk to your local traffic engineer and look at the best research out there. So all I can give is sort of a conceptual answer without being in the environment, right? Having said that, the short answer is simply striping a crosswalk across a wide road. So if it's a multi-lane road and only putting the crosswalk down can often be problematic because there's not enough treatment there to let a driver really expect to see a kid and give them the protection. As the person who asked the question sort of alluded to, if you can do additional things, signage, a raised median in the middle, possible lighting, further treatments, mid-block crossings can be great because what you do tend to do is move the pedestrian away from intersections where you have the conflicts associated with turning vehicles, right on red, things like that. So sometimes mid-block can be great. And more importantly, I don't think it's absurd to acknowledge that if that's the most direct route, if we've got a neighborhood here and the road comes out or a trail comes out and the school's right there, kids are not going to go 300 feet out of their way. I mean, we can yell at them, we can put up fencing. We've seen kids climb over fences, to try to deter them from crossing at the quote-unquote wrong spot. So it is they're asking the right question and saying, if this is the natural crossing point, this is where kids are coming from the neighborhood and that's where the school is, this is the natural crossing point, what can we do to make that crossing safer? But simply striping a crosswalk is probably not sufficient, obviously depending very, very much on the local conditions. And there may be other treatments that have to be, but those exist, and they're well understood, by the way. We know how to design mid-block crossings in an appropriate way if you've got the right setting for it. A simple thing. The median island, often we have the crosswalk offset so that when you come out to the median, the pedestrian is forced to angle to the right a little bit. In other words, the crosswalk doesn't go straight across, but it's sort of, if you could imagine it as sort of a Z shape. And that Z, the offset, forces the pedestrian to look toward oncoming traffic as they're passing through the island. And that enhances the likelihood that they're going to see and yield for oncoming vehicles. So there are lots of good design solutions, and often, again, they only require paints and signs and things like that. So take that conversation up with engineering and get the top dogs in the conversation, too.
Sure. Okay, and we have one more, and it's kind of a big one, and a number of people have written in with a kind of variation on this question. And the question is, how do we reframe Safe Routes to School in the wake of MAP 21? A lot of people obviously are curious about MAP 21. It's on their mind. So anything you can kind of close up the program with in regards to that would be great.
Yeah, so MAP 21 is the sort of the reauthorization of transportation funding at the national level. And historically, so in recent years, we've had two big piles of money in our federal transportation bill. One was called Transportation Enhancements, and the other was indeed the Safe Routes to School funding. And the Safe Routes to School funding required that there be a state-level Safe Routes coordinator. Similarly, the Transportation Enhancements required that you had a state bicycle and pedestrian coordinator, and there were funding streams that were, we could pursue to get those missing bike and ped facilities. It's not at all clear sort of how that's going to play going forward, but it does not look like there's a unique Safe Routes fund, that it's being folded into some of the other stuff. So we could get into the details. Let me just say this. Here's my take, that we are going to have to think about the very things I alluded to in the conversation about systematic and policy-level changes. So it may be that we're not going to be able to go after unique sidewalk funds through a Safe Routes to School grant program to fix the sidewalks by our school. But that doesn't preclude us from working across our community in getting the policy to be complete streets for every road in our community and prioritizing those near the schools. So if you were to ask me where I'm putting my energy now in the local community, I'm trying to get us to think about complete streets on every project we do, whether it's digging up the road for sewers, whether it's routine paving, even simply repairing potholes, the painting program. I mean, every year, most municipalities repave and repair some certain number of miles of roadway. And in some communities, I admit, it's a very short mileage, but they're out there doing road work. Every time we do that work, we should be asking the question, can we make it safer for bicyclists and pedestrians, and in particular, our youngest bicyclists and pedestrians trying to get to school. So acknowledging that the landscape's going to look different and there may not be that unique funding stream for Safe Routes to School, there is a much greater receptivity to complete streets as a policy than even 5 years ago. In other words, 5 years ago, 8 years ago, a guy like me would go to talk to a conference of transportation engineers, and they'd roll their eyes and go, this is one of these wacko, greeny, walk-bike guys. And now they're saying, oh, yeah, complete streets. We've got a workshop on complete streets later in the afternoon during the conference. And I'm not making that up. I mean, that's a pretty dramatic change. And so I think that should be the conversation. Let's not have, in fact, this is what we have to do anyway. Let's not have bicycle and pedestrian accommodation be that unique thing that only the wacko, safety advocates are asking for. It should be how we do transportation in this country. We shouldn't touch a road anywhere without thinking about how bicyclists, pedestrians, and transit are going to negotiate it.
Sure, and I think that's great.
Listen, don't be bummed out. I know people think, oh, the funding is going to go out the window. We can't do that. We cannot afford to lose the momentum of this phenomenal work you've all been doing. You've got to just decide to drive this momentum right into the next thing, and I think one of the biggies is complete streets, and another one is school siting. Let's stop building schools where no one can walk to them. This is so excruciatingly important, and if all you do is influence those two things, it may not help your kid today get to the elementary school that's down the street from you. I understand that. And this is a problem we face in my community. But it will help the next generation of kids, God forbid, actually have an opportunity to be free-range kids again. And that's how we have to be thinking about this. That's
great. No, thank you, Mark. That was wonderful, wonderful presentation, great answers to those questions. I think it's very inspiring. Hopefully folks will leave kind of re-energized to go focus on.
Keep up the good work.
Yeah, absolutely. So again, I want to thank everybody for joining us this afternoon, and thank you again, Mark.
My pleasure.
And thanks everyone also for putting up with our small technical difficulty and sticking with us for this extra few minutes that we stayed on to get through our questions. I do want to remind everyone that our next webinar is going to be on December 4th and that's going to be Strengthening Your Safe Routes to School Web, New Ideas for Partners. The registration should be going up shortly, I'd say within the next couple days, and you can check on both the America Walks website and the National Center for Safe Routes to School website. If you're signed up to receive our email notices, you'll also just receive a notice about that registration when it becomes available. And that is all that I have for everyone today, so thank you again for everyone for joining us, and we hope to have you on December 4th. So have a good afternoon, everyone.